The fluorescent lights of North Haven General's third-floor nursing station hummed a monotonous, sickly tune. It was the soundtrack of 3am, a sound Evelyn Reed had come to associate with stale coffee, the faint scent of bleach, and a profound, bone-deep weariness. She moved with an economy of motion that her colleagues mistook for timidity, checking charts, noting vitals, her pen scratching quietly in the oppressive silence. To them, she was just Nurse Reed. Quiet, efficient, forgettable, too young to be so serious, they whispered. Too withdrawn. She preferred it that way. Forgettable was safe. Anonymity was a fortress she had built around herself brick by painstaking brick. Reed, a sharp voice cut through the hum. Dr. Marcus Thorne stood with his arms crossed, his expensive scrubs immaculate even at this hour. He was the king of the night shift, a senior attending with a god complex and a scalpel-sharp tongue. He held up a chart as if it were a failed exam paper. Patient in 304. Mr. Henderson. His saline drip. You adjusted it. It was not a question. Yes, doctor, Evelyn said, her voice even. His urine output was low and his pressure was trending down. I increased it by 10 milliliters per hour to maintain perfusion. Thorne's smile was a thin, cruel line. You thought his pressure was trending down. You are a nurse, Reed. You are not a doctor. You do not make diagnostic judgments, and you do not alter a physician's orders without a direct, verbal command. Is that understood? A flicker of something ancient and hot sparked in Evelyn's chest. The condescension was a familiar weight. She had carried heavier. The protocol allows for titration within a set range based on patient response. I acted within that protocol. I don't care what the protocol allows, Thorne sneered, tossing the chart onto the counter. I care about my orders. My name is on that chart. My license. Not yours. You are a glorified pill pusher with 2 years of community college, and you will remember that. The other nurses at the station, Jessica and Maria, suddenly found the floor fascinating. They had seen this before. Thorne's favorite pastime was dressing down Evelyn Reed. She never fought back. Not really. She just stood there and took it, her face a placid mask. Evelyn's hands, resting on the countertop, were perfectly still. Hands that had performed emergency thoracotomies in the screaming dark. Hands that had clamped bleeding arteries with nothing but a hemostat and a prayer. Hands that he had just dismissed as belonging to a pill pusher. She curled them slowly into fists, then, just as slowly, uncurled them. It will not happen again, Dr. Thorne, she said. The words tasted like ash. See that it doesn't, he said, turning his back on her and striding away, a king returning to his throne. Jessica shot her a sympathetic look. Don't mind him, Evie. He's just, you know. Evelyn offered a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I know. She went back to her charts. But the fortress had a crack in it. The past was leaking in, a toxic whisper. She remembered another voice, screaming over the rotor wash of a Black Hawk. Doc. We got 3 more inbound, GSWs and blast trauma. Need you at the pad. Now. Her hands had not been still then. They had been covered in blood and grit, working with a speed and certainty that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely, someone she had buried in the dust of Kandahar. An hour later, the call came, not from the ER, but from the hospital administrator's on-call line. Nurse Manager Henderson, a woman whose face seemed permanently pinched in disapproval, approached the station. Reed, she said, her tone clipped. "We need to have a word." "In my office." The walk was short. The office was sterile. Henderson did not ask her to sit. "Evelyn, your probationary period is ending. And well, the board has decided not to extend a permanent offer of employment." Evelyn blinked. She had done her job flawlessly. She was never late. She never complained. "May I ask why?" Henderson shuffled some papers, avoiding eye contact. "There have been reports, a certain lack of team integration, a tendency to be insubordinate." She finally looked up, her eyes cold. "Dr. Thorne has filed multiple complaints. He feels you overstep your duties, that you don't respect the chain of command." "Thorne, of course." "We feel you are not a good fit for the culture here at North Haven General," Henderson concluded. "Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. Please clear out your locker by the end of your shift." And that was it. Fired for being competent, for trying to keep a patient from hypotensive shock. The irony was so bitter it almost made her laugh. She had survived IEDs, mass casualty incidents, and the kind of moral injury that eats a soul from the inside out. But she could not survive hospital politics. She walked back to the nursing station. Henderson had already informed the others. There was a palpable sense of relief in the air, a disgusting, celebratory energy. Jessica and Maria were whispering, glancing at her with a mixture of pity and schadenfreude. They were glad the target was leaving. Evelyn said nothing. She walked to the small locker room, the squeak of her shoes echoing in the now hostile silence. She pulled out her spare set of scrubs, a worn paperback, a photo she never looked at. She packed the small cardboard box without a word, a ghost in the machine, being exorcised. The quiet was shattered by a sound that did not belong in a hospital. A low, desperate roar of tortured metal, followed by a series of sickening crunches that seemed to vibrate through the very foundation of the building. It was close. Too close. For a moment, Evelyn was back in the desert. The sound of a V-bead hitting the gate, her body tensed, muscles coiling, her mind instantly shifting into a different gear. Triage, damage control, threat assessment. Then the overhead speakers crackled to life, a panicked voice from the emergency department. "Code Orange. Mass casualty incident. I repeat, Code Orange. All available staff to the ER. All on-call surgeons, report immediately. Code Orange." The hospital's plan for disaster, a plan she had read and found woefully inadequate. Jessica and Maria were already running. "Evie, come on." Jessica called back. Evelyn stood frozen for a second, the cardboard box in her hands. She was no longer staff. She was a civilian. It was not her problem. She could just walk away. Get in her car and drive until the sun came up. Start over. Again, but the screams were starting now. Faint, but growing louder as the first ambulances arrived. It was a sound she knew intimately, the sound of tearing flesh and shattered bone. The sound of lives measured in seconds. She put the box down. Her feet were moving before she made a conscious decision, carrying her not towards the exit, but towards the chaos, towards the fire. It was a gravitational pull she was powerless to resist. The ER was a scene from a nightmare. A multi-vehicle pile-up on the nearby interstate. State troopers were trying to maintain order, their faces grim. Gurneys were everywhere, a tide of blood and broken bodies. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood and the groans of the wounded. The staff was overwhelmed. Residents looked shell-shocked. Nurses ran frantically, their movements inefficient, panicked. There was no system, no flow, just pure, unadulterated chaos. Dr. Thorne was at the center of it, his face pale, his voice strained as he shouted orders that were immediately lost in the din. "Get me a chest tube in Bay 3. Where are those cross-matched units for Bay 5? Somebody page cardio, now." Evelyn saw it all with a clarity that was terrifying. It was a tactical disaster. They were losing the golden hour. They were losing it with every wasted second. She started moving, not as a nurse, but as something else. She grabbed a young resident who was staring, paralyzed, at a man with a mangled leg. "You," she said, her voice low and sharp. It cut through his panic. His leg is a mess, but his airway is clear and he's talking. He's green tagged. "Go, find someone who isn't breathing." She moved to the next gurney. A woman, unconscious, with significant facial trauma. Evelyn didn't wait. She tilted the head, performed a jaw thrust, and heard the gurgle of a blocked airway. "I need suction and an OPA, now." She barked at a passing nurse, who, startled by her authority, immediately complied. She was a phantom moving through the storm, tagging patients with a mental acuity honed in the crucible of combat, black for the dead or dying, red for the critical, yellow for the serious, green for the walking wounded. It was the rhythm of combat triage, a brutal calculus of life and death she knew by heart. Thorne finally noticed her. He stormed over, his face a mask of fury. "Reed, what in God's name do you think you're doing? You don't work here. This is a restricted area. Get out before I have security throw you out." "You're losing control, Doctor," Evelyn said, not looking at him. She was applying a makeshift tourniquet to a man's arm using a strip of linen and a pen. "You have 3 critical chest wounds and no one is decompressing them. You have a crush injury in Bay 4 who's about to go into renal failure. You are treating the noise, not the injuries." "I will not be lectured by a fired nurse," he seethed. Just then, paramedics burst through the doors with a new patient, this one on a backboard, surrounded by an aura of controlled urgency that set him apart from the civilian victims. He wore the remnants of tactical pants. His body was a roadmap of catastrophic injury. A massive crush injury to the chest, a mangled leg, and a piece of rebar protruding from his abdomen. The lead paramedic, a man with 20 years on the job, looked at Thorne. "Doctor, this is Sergeant Carter." He was a passenger in the lead vehicle. "Multiple traumas, pressure is bottoming out, he's barely conscious." Thorne's eyes widened at the severity of the injuries. "Get him to Trauma 1. Page surgery, get me an oar." Massive transfusion protocol, now. They wheeled the gurney into the primary trauma bay. Evelyn felt a cold dread wash over her as she saw the man's face, pale and grimacing in pain. A tattoo of a winged dagger was visible on his forearm. Her blood ran cold. She knew that tattoo. Inside Trauma 1, the team swarmed the patient. Thorne began his assessment, barking orders. "Chest X-ray, fast scan, get me a central line kit." The patient's eyes fluttered open, hazy with morphine and shock. They scanned the room, unfocused, filled with a primal fear. Then they landed on Evelyn, who was standing just outside the bay, a ghost at the edge of the chaos. Recognition dawned. The fear in his eyes was replaced by something else, a desperate, impossible hope. His voice was a ragged whisper, but it cut through the noise of the trauma bay like a surgeon's blade. "Doc?" The entire room went still. Every doctor, every nurse, every technician froze. They all turned to look at Evelyn. Thorne stared, his mouth slightly agape. What did he say? The sergeant's eyes were locked on Evelyn, pleading, "Doc, it's you. It's really you." He tried to lift a hand. "Don't let them, it's just like Firebase Nightingale. Firebase Nightingale." The name was a key, unlocking a door in Evelyn's mind she had welded shut. A torrent of memories flooded her. Dust, blood, the screams of the dying, a sky filled with smoke. Thorne looked from the dying soldier to the quiet night nurse he had fired less than 2 hours ago. The pieces were not connecting. "Reed, what is he talking about? What does he mean, Doc?" Evelyn's mind was clear. The fog of her quiet life had burned away. There was only the mission. Save the patient. That was the only rule that mattered. She walked into the trauma bay. Her movement was no longer timid. It was purposeful, powerful. She was no longer Nurse Reed. She was someone else entirely. "He's talking about me," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier deference. It was calm, authoritative, chilling, because I was his surgeon. The shock in the room was a physical thing, a collective, silent gasp. The patient, Sergeant Carter, began to crash. The monitor screamed its high-pitched alarm. "He's in VTAC." A resident yelled, "Pressure's gone. Charge the paddles to 200. Thorne commanded, grabbing them. "No." Evelyn's voice cracked like a whip. Thorne froze, paddles in hand. "What?" "He's not in VTAC from a cardiac event," she said, her eyes scanning the monitor. The patient, the whole picture, with terrifying speed. "He's got a cardiac tamponade. The crush injury. His pericardial sac is full of blood. You shock him, and he'll die on the table. You're just shocking a heart that can't beat." She pointed to the fast scan monitor. "Look, the right ventricle is collapsing. Classic sign." Thorne stared at the ultrasound. She was right. He had been so focused on the algorithm, he had missed the cause. His face went white. "We need to get him to an OR," Thorne stammered. "A pericardial window." "He doesn't have time," Evelyn stated flatly. "He has less than 2 minutes. Maybe 1. She looked directly at Thorne, and for the first time, he saw the abyss of experience in her eyes. It was an ocean, and he was standing at the shore. "We're opening his chest. Right here. Right now." A wave of disbelief washed over the room. "That's insane," a young surgeon, Dr. Chen, breathed. "An emergency thoracotomy in the ER? Without a sterile field? The infection risk, he can't get an infection if he's dead," Evelyn countered, her voice like ice. She turned to a terrified-looking nurse. "Get me a number 10 blade, a Finocchietto rib spreader, and the biggest damn clamps you have. And betadine. All of it." The nurse stared, paralyzed now. Evelyn's command was not a request. It was an order forged in the absolute authority of life and death. The nurse scrambled to obey. Thorne was still reeling. "We can't. The protocol, liability." Evelyn turned her full attention to him. The quiet, timid nurse was gone. In her place stood a commander. "Dr. Thorne, your patient is dying. You have 2 options. You can stand there and quote protocol while he dies, or you can assist me and save his life. The choice is yours. But I am not losing another soldier on my watch. Not a question, a statement. The force of her will was a physical blow. Thorn, the king of the night shift, found himself utterly dethroned. He looked at the dying soldier, at the screaming monitor, and then at the impossible woman in front of him. He saw a certainty he had never possessed in his entire career. He swallowed his pride. It was the most difficult thing he had ever done. "What do you need?" he asked, his voice humbled. A ghost of a smile touched Evelyn's lips. "Gloves, and stay out of my way." The nurse returned with the instruments. Evelyn ripped open a pack of sterile gloves, her movements a blur of efficiency. She poured the entire bottle of betadine over Sergeant Carter's chest, the brown liquid mixing with the blood. "Scalpel," she said, holding out her hand. Thorn, now acting as her scrub nurse, slapped it into her palm. Without a moment's hesitation, she made a long, sweeping incision from his sternum to his back, along the line of the fifth intercostal space. Blood welled up. "Suction," she commanded. She cut through the muscle, the layers of tissue, with a precision that was breathtaking. There was no wasted motion. Each cut was perfect. She was not a butcher, she was an artist, and this was her canvas. The doctors and nurses around her could only watch, their own training feeling like a child's crayon drawing next to a masterpiece. Rib spreader. Thorn handed it to her. She inserted it between the ribs and cranked it open, exposing the thoracic cavity. The man's lung, bruised but inflating, was visible. And beside it, the heart. It was a horrifying sight. The pericardial sac, which should have been a thin, translucent layer, was swollen and dark purple, stretched taut with trapped blood. The heart itself was barely quivering. "That's the tamponade," she said, almost clinically, as if lecturing a class. "The pressure from the blood is squeezing the heart shut. I need to relieve it." She took the scalpel again. With a delicate, steady hand, she nicked the pericardium. A geyser of dark, old blood erupted, splashing onto her arms, her face. The pressure was released, and the heart, freed from its prison, gave a mighty lurch. And then another. It began to beat. A real, strong, thumping beat. The egg monitor, which had been a flat line of doom, suddenly jumped. Sinus rhythm. Unstable, but it was there. A collective sigh of relief went through the room. It was a miracle. They had just witnessed a miracle. "Don't celebrate yet," Evelyn snapped, her focus absolute. "The bleed is from a laceration in the right atrium. I need to close it." She pointed with the bloody scalpel. "Thorn, get your finger on that hole. Right there." Gentle pressure. Thorn, his arrogance completely stripped away, did as he was told, his own highly trained fingers feeling clumsy compared to hers. "Suture, 3 no proline," she ordered. She began to stitch the tear in the beating heart, her needle dipping in and out with the rhythm of the contractions. It was a procedure of almost unimaginable difficulty, something most cardiac surgeons would only attempt in the pristine environment of Anne or with the patient on bypass. She was doing it in a chaotic ER, with basic instruments, on a heart that was still fighting for its life. She worked in a bubble of intense concentration. The chaos of the ER faded away. The other patients, the other doctors, they all disappeared. There was only her, the patient, and the mission. She was back in the tent, the sand blowing outside, the generators humming, a line of wounded soldiers waiting for her hands to save them. She tied the final knot. "Release pressure," she told Thorne. He lifted his finger. The bleeding had stopped. The heart beat on, stronger now. The monitor showed his blood pressure slowly, miraculously, climbing from 60 over palp to 80 over 40. Then 90 over 60. He was alive. Evelyn took a step back, her body slick with sweat and someone else's blood. She looked at her hands. They were trembling, but not from fear. From the adrenaline, from the release. The room was silent. Not the silence of panic, but the silence of awe. Every single person was staring at her. Dr. Chen, the young surgeon, Jessica and Maria, the nurses who had gossiped about her, and Dr. Marcus Thorne, the man who had fired her. His face was a mixture of shame, disbelief, and profound, unadulterated respect. "My God," Thorne whispered, looking from the stabilized patient to Evelyn. "Who are you?" Before she could answer, the patient, Sergeant Carter, stirred. His eyes were clearer now. He looked at her, and a real smile, weak but genuine, touched his lips. "Told you," he rasped. "She's the best there ever was." They called her the Angel of Kandahar. The Angel of Kandahar, the name hung in the air, an impossible title for the quiet night nurse they thought they knew. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of that name settling on her shoulders again after so long. It was not a name she had chosen. It was a name that had been given to her by the grateful, the dying, and the dead. She opened them and looked at Thorne. "I'm the person you fired for insubordination." The shame on Thorne's face deepened. He took a step toward her, his posture no longer arrogant, but deferential. I don't know what to say. What you just did, it wasn't in any textbook. It was impossible." "In a hospital, yes," Evelyn said, her voice tired. "In a war zone, it's Tuesday." She began to peel off her bloody gloves. "He's stable for now, but he needs a real oar. That rebar is still in his abdomen, and his leg needs debridement. Get him upstairs." She had taken command, saved a life, and now she was handing it back. But the dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. Thorne was no longer giving orders. He was taking them. "Of course," he said immediately. "Chen, you're with me. Let's get him prepped for transfer." He turned back to Evelyn, his expression deeply earnest. "Doctor, Reed, I am so sorry. I was arrogant. I was a fool. What I said to you, there is no excuse." It was the most sincere apology she had ever heard. It chipped away another piece of the wall she had built. "Forget it," she said, though she knew she never would. "Just take care of your patient." She walked out of the trauma bay, leaving a room full of stunned medical professionals in her wake. She needed air. She needed to wash the blood off. She walked to the deserted locker room, her mind a whirlwind. The past she had run from had just crashed, literally, back into her life. She splashed cold water on her face, staring at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror. The face was the same, but the eyes were different. The ghost was gone. The commander was looking back at her. Thorne found her there a few minutes later. The rest of the ER was still a mess, but the initial wave of panic had subsided, replaced by a more organized response. A system she had unconsciously put in place with her triage. "They took him up to the OR," Thorne said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "He's going to make it. You saved his life." Evelyn just nodded, drying her face with a rough paper towel. "He called you Doc," Thorne said, probing gently. "Sergeant Carter. He said you were his surgeon. You're not a nurse, are you?" Evelyn let out a long, slow breath. The secret was out. There was no point in hiding anymore. "No, I'm not." "Then what? Who are you?" "My name is Dr. Evelyn Reed," she said, her voice flat. "I was a major in the United States Army, chief of trauma surgery for a forward surgical team attached to the 75th Ranger Regiment. I did 3 tours in Afghanistan." Thorne's jaw literally dropped. A major, chief of trauma surgery, attached to the Rangers. That was the elite of the elite. It was a world away from a community hospital night shift. It explained the speed, the skill, the impossible calm under fire. It explained everything. "But why are you here? Working as a nurse? A surgeon with your background, you could be head of trauma at any top-tier hospital in the country. Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic. They'd be fighting over you." This was the question, the one she had been running from. "Because I failed," she said, the words tasting like poison. Firebase Nightingale. The place Sergeant Carter mentioned. It was a mass casualty event. A suicide bomber hit the mess tent during dinner. We had over 50 critical casualties at once, more than our tiny surgical team could handle. She stared at the wall, but she was seeing the past. The red dust, the black smoke, the bodies. So many bodies. I was the lead surgeon. I was in command of the triage. I had to make the calls. Who we could save, who we had to let die. Her voice cracked, just for a second. We worked for 36 straight hours. We saved 38 people. But we lost 12. 12 soldiers who might have lived if I had made different choices. If I had been faster. Better, 38 saves in those conditions is a miracle, Thorne whispered, horrified and awed. No one could have done better. My commanding officer didn't think so, she said bitterly. Colonel Stryker. He said I lost control, that my unconventional methods led to unnecessary deaths. There was an inquiry. I was cleared of wrongdoing, but my career was over. The report followed me. The whispers. She cracks under pressure. So I left. I buried Major Reed and became Nurse Reed. I just wanted to be quiet. The story hung in the air between them, heavy and tragic. A story of a hero scapegoated and broken by the very system she had sworn to serve. That's not failure, Thorne said, his voice thick with emotion. That's a tragedy. And for you to be here, taking orders from an idiot like me, it's a crime. Before Evelyn could respond, her entire world tilted on its axis again. Through the locker room door, she saw them. 2 men in dark, impeccably tailored suits walked into the ER. They moved with the quiet, predatory grace of federal agents. They were followed by a man in a crisp army uniform, a full-bird colonel, his chest a rainbow of ribbons. His face was hard, etched with lines of impatience and authority. Evelyn's heart stopped. She knew that face. She knew it from her nightmares. Colonel John Stryker. He conferred with the hospital administrator, Henderson, who looked flustered and intimidated. Stryker's eyes scanned the ER, cold and calculating. He was looking for someone. He was looking for her. What's going on? Thorne asked, seeing the look on Evelyn's face. It's him, she breathed, a cold dread seeping into her bones. Stryker, how did he find you? The procedure, she realized aloud. The emergency thoracotomy in the ER. It's a high-risk, low-frequency procedure. It probably flagged some database. A military patient, a signature injury pattern. He must have been alerted. Stryker saw her then. His eyes locked with hers across the chaotic room. There was no recognition of a former colleague. There was only the cold look of a man who had found a loose end he needed to tie up. He started walking towards them, his two suited shadows flanking him. "Reed, what do we do?" Thorne asked, instinctively moving to stand slightly in front of her, a protective gesture that would have been laughable 3 hours ago. "You do nothing," Evelyn said, her mind racing. "This isn't your fight." Stryker stopped a few feet away. "Major Reed," he said, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr. "It's been a long time. You're a hard woman to find." "It's Dr. Reed," she corrected him, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "And I made it that way for a reason, Colonel Stryker." Stryker's eyes flickered to Thorne, dismissing him as irrelevant. "I'm here for Sergeant Carter. He's a person of interest in a national security matter. I'm having him transferred to Walter Reed." "He's my patient," Evelyn said, stepping forward. "He's post-op from a traumatic chest wound. He's not stable enough to be moved." A cold smile touched Stryker's lips. "I heard you performed an unsanctioned, reckless procedure on him. The same kind of field medicine that caused so many problems at Nightingale." "Some things never change." He held up a file. "I have the authority. This hospital and you will comply." This was it. The confrontation she had run from for years. But she was not the same broken woman who had left the army. She had just stared into the abyss and pulled a man back. She was not running anymore. "No," Evelyn said. Stryker's smile vanished. "What did you say?" "I said no," she repeated, her voice ringing with newfound power. "You are not taking my patient. Not now, not ever. His medical condition is precarious. Moving him would be a death sentence, and I will not allow you to sacrifice another soldier for your convenience, Colonel." The reference to Nightingale was a direct hit. Stryker's eyes flashed with anger. "You are a civilian. You have no authority here. You will stand down, or I will have you removed." "She's not just a civilian," a new voice boomed. Dr. Thorne stepped forward, his face set with determination. "She is the consulting surgeon on this case, and as the attending physician on this shift, I concur with her assessment. This patient is not to be moved. It would be a gross violation of medical ethics." Henderson, the administrator, scurried over. "Colonel, please, this is a hospital. This is a matter of military jurisdiction," Stryker snapped, his composure cracking. "Is it?" Evelyn challenged. "Or is it a matter of silencing a witness? Sergeant Carter was at Firebase Nightingale, wasn't he? He knows what really happened. He knows you're the one who called off the medevac helicopters because you thought the landing zone was too hot. You're the one who left us there with 50 critical casualties and no way out. You're the one who let those 12 men die." The accusation, spoken aloud for the first time, hung in the air like a live grenade. Stryker's face went pale with rage. The two suits tensed, ready to move. "That is a baseless, slanderous accusation," Stryker hissed. "One that ended your career once before. Don't make the same mistake again." This was the moment. The choice: run again or fight. I chose to run before. I hid in the shadows, letting guilt and his lies eat me alive. I let him define me by my worst day. But tonight, I remembered who I am. I'm not just the surgeon who lost 12 men. I'm the one who saved 38. I'm the one who saved Sergeant Carter's life, right here, an hour ago. He didn't break me, he just buried me. And I'm done being buried. It's not a mistake if it's the truth, Evelyn said, her voice clear and strong. She looked past Stryker, at the ER staff who were all watching, at Thorne who stood beside her, at Henderson who looked terrified. I will testify under oath. And so will Sergeant Carter. And I'm willing to bet there are dozens of other soldiers from that day who would do the same. Stryker looked cornered, and that made him dangerous. You have no proof, don't I? A new voice entered the standoff. They all turned. A man in a flight suit, covered in dust, stood at the entrance to the ER. He was flanked by 4 soldiers in full combat gear, their rifles held in a low-ready position. They were Delta. The quiet professionals, their presence changed the atmosphere from tense to critical. The man in the flight suit, a chief warrant officer with pilot's wings on his chest, looked at Stryker with open contempt. Colonel, fancy seeing you here. He then looked at Evelyn. Dr. Reed, we heard a call on the net. Something about Firebase Nightingale. Who are you? Stryker demanded. CW4 Miller. I was the pilot of Dustoff 7-3 that night. The medevac you waved off. He held up a small, rugged tablet. Funny thing about modern helicopters, Colonel, they have cockpit voice recorders. And data recorders. I have the entire transmission. You, ordering us to abandon the landing zone against the advice of the ground commander. You, classifying the zone as non-permissive when we had visual confirmation it was clear. The blood drained from Stryker's face. He was trapped, utterly and completely. Miller walked past him and stopped in front of Evelyn. His eyes were filled with a deep, weary respect. Sergeant Carter is one of ours, ma'am. His unit sends their thanks. And their apologies. We should have stood up to Stryker back then. We're not making that mistake twice. He turned to his men. Secure the patient's room. No one goes in or out without my or Dr. Reed's permission. The Delta operators moved with silent efficiency, creating a perimeter around the hallway leading to the IQ. They ignored Stryker completely, as if he were a piece of furniture. His authority had evaporated. Stryker stood there, defeated, his face a mask of impotent fury. The 2 suits looked at him, then at the Delta soldiers, and took a half-step back. They knew a losing fight when they saw one. This is not over, Reed, Stryker snarled, his last pathetic attempt at a threat. Yes, Colonel, Evelyn said, her voice calm and final. It is. With his power broken, Stryker turned and stalked out of the hospital, his empire of lies crumbling behind him. The ER was quiet for a moment. Then, someone started clapping. A slow, hesitant clap from one of the nurses. Then another joined in, and another. Soon the entire ER staff, the paramedics, the residents, even Henderson, were applauding. They were applauding the quiet night nurse they had dismissed, who had just faced down a corrupt colonel and saved one of their own. Thorne looked at Evelyn, his eyes shining with admiration. I have never, in my life, seen anything like that. Evelyn felt a strange lightness in her chest. The weight of Nightingale, the guilt and the shame was finally gone, replaced by a fierce, burning vindication. Over the next few hours, the world shifted. CW4 Miller's evidence was sent up the chain of command. An official investigation into Colonel Stryker was launched by dawn. The story of what happened at North Haven General, the impossible surgery, the confrontation, spread like wildfire through the military and medical communities. By 7 a.m., as the day shift was arriving, a different kind of visitor appeared. A 2-star general, accompanied by the hospital's CEO. They found Evelyn in the small, empty cafeteria sipping a cup of coffee. Thorne sat with her, a silent, supportive presence. "Dr. Reed," the general began, his voice deep and respectful. "I am General Peterson. I've read the preliminary report. On behalf of the United States Army, I want to offer you our deepest apologies." Evelyn just nodded. An apology couldn't bring back the dead, but it was a start. "What Colonel Stryker did was a betrayal of everything we stand for," Peterson continued. "He will be held accountable. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because of you." He slid a file across the table. "Your file. And Sergeant Carter's. What you did last night, it shouldn't have been possible. We have surgeons at Walter Reed who couldn't have done that. Your skills are not just exceptional, they are unique. A hybrid of elite surgical training and profound combat experience." "I'm not in the Army anymore, General," she said. "I know," he replied. "And I'm not asking you to be. We have a problem, Dr. Reed. We have soldiers returning with complex, polytraumatic injuries that civilian hospitals are not equipped to handle. They don't understand the mechanics of blast injuries. They don't have the experience. We need a bridge between our world and theirs. We need a program. A rapid response surgical team that can consult on these cases or deploy to civilian hospitals when one of our own is brought in. A team that can teach these life-saving techniques." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "We don't just need a program. We need a leader. Someone who understands both sides. Someone with unquestionable skill and the courage to challenge a broken system. We need you." The CEO chimed in. "North Haven would be honored to host such a program. We would provide the funding, the facilities, anything you need. You would have full autonomy. You would answer to no one but yourself." He glanced at Thorne. "You could build your own team, starting with perhaps a new head of trauma surgery who knows how to follow a good order when he hears one." Thorne looked at Evelyn, his expression pleading. It was a chance for his own redemption. It was an impossible offer. A chance to not just reclaim her identity, but to forge a new one. To take the worst day of her life and turn it into a force for good. To ensure that what happened at Nightingale, and what almost happened here, would never happen again. She thought of the 12 soldiers she couldn't save. She couldn't change that. But she could honor them. She could save the next one, and the one after that. She looked at the general, then at the CEO. A real smile, the first in years, touched her lips. It was bright and fierce and full of purpose. "When do I start?" 1 month later. The new Center for Advanced Combat Trauma was state-of-the-art. It smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Dr. Evelyn Reed stood before her new team. It was a hand-picked group of surgeons, nurses, and former combat medics. Dr. Marcus Thorne, looking 10 years younger, stood beside her, her new second in command. Jessica and Maria, humbled and eager, were her lead nurses. C.W. Miller, retired from the Army, was their logistics coordinator. Evelyn wore crisp, new scrubs, a custom set. On the sleeve was a patch, a caduceus intertwined with a winged dagger. Underneath it, the name of the unit, Nightingale Team. She was no longer hiding, she was no longer a ghost. She was a commander again. She was about to begin her orientation brief when the red phone on the wall buzzed. The direct line from the Pentagon. Miller answered it, listened, and then looked at Evelyn. His face was grim. "Ma'am, there's been an incident, a bombing at an embassy overseas. Multiple casualties, including critical U.S. personnel. The local hospitals are overwhelmed. They're asking for help." Evelyn looked at her team. Their faces were a mixture of nerves and excitement. They were ready. She walked to the dispatch board and picked up the microphone for the hospital-wide public address system, a system she had once been terrified of. Her voice rang out, clear and steady, filled with the calm, absolute authority that was her birthright. This is Dr. Reed. Activating the Nightingale Protocol. Wheels up in 30 minutes. She put the microphone down and turned to her team. "Let's go to work." As she walked out towards the helipad on the roof, where a military transport was already descending, she felt it. The perfect, beautiful synthesis of her two lives. She was not Nurse Reed or Major Reed, she was Dr. Evelyn Reed. The Angel of Kandahar. And she was finally home. She had packed her locker without a word, a lifetime ago. A woman fired and forgotten. But then the radio had crackled. Not with a code orange, but with a call to arms that echoed from the dust of Afghanistan to the sterile halls of North Haven. A call that had awoken a warrior. And every soldier in the building, the ones in uniform and the ones in scrubs, had gone still, listening to the voice of their commander. My voice. And we were ready. We were always ready.